UFC Vegas 84. It's the first fight card of the year 2024, first UFC card of the new year. And man, it's felt like forever since we've seen some fights. I mean, really, it's only been 3 weeks. We're kind of spoiled as fight fans, but it's felt like forever since we've seen some UFC action. We're finally getting a card Saturday night, and it's a pretty solid card. I mean, for an Apex card, for a Vegas card, got a lot of interesting matchups here. Obviously headlined by two top light heavyweights, Magomed Ankalaev and Johnny Walker. It's a rematch from their fight last October in Abu Dhabi that unfortunately didn't get to have a resolution, didn't get to follow all the way through with, ended prematurely with that illegal knee from Ankalaev that, unfortunately resulted in that no contest. So we're finally going to get to see this. It's a 5-round main event. You gotta figure a title shot, a light heavyweight title shot is on the line here, and the winner is probably going to face Alex Pereira at some point early this year for the light heavyweight title. So some high stakes in the main event, and I'm going to break down every single fight on this card from top to bottom. I'm going to give you my picks, predictions, and insights. But I'm also going to give you something else to think about as you're putting your parlays together, as you're getting your bets ready for the card. I'm going to talk about things like mindset, psychology, and some mental attributes that might play a factor in some of these matchups. Because listen, it is an often overlooked aspect of the fight game. We tend to just focus on the physical attributes, right? The stylistic, attributes of these fighters, the striking, the wrestling, the grappling. We look at recent performances. We look at physical statistics. All good things to look at as we're trying to, make predictions and come up with a predictable way to pick fights in a very unpredictable sport, right? So you have to look at those things. But we tend to forget that there's a war going on in our minds as human beings, and it is especially true with professional athletes and especially with professional fighters. And if you do not win the war in your mind, you will not win the war in the octagon. Having said that, obviously, I'm not a mind reader. I mean, otherwise I'd be like, the UFC's version of Professor X, which would be pretty cool. But I can't do that, right? I don't know for sure what these athletes, what these fighters are actually thinking, what kind of battles they're facing in their minds. But I can kind of pick up on things. If you pay attention close enough, you can come up with a pretty good assumption. Especially you look at recent performances, you look at some of the stakes that are associated with these matchups and some other factors as well. So I am going to make a hypothesis, if you will, on some of these matchups and some of the mental aspects that you might want to consider before you bet on a certain fighter. So with that being said, let's get right into it with the first fight of the night. We got flyweight action kicking things off. We have 21-year-old prospect Joshua Van taking on the debuting Felipe Bunes. Listen, Josh Van is a very good boxer. He's got good hands. He loves to be in the pocket, and he loves to kind of close that distance and just let his hands fly. And he has been very effective since making his debut last year, early last year, when he came over and totally picked apart Zoma Zumagulov, who was a very experienced flyweight, very high-level flyweight. And Van went out there and looked like a seasoned veteran. He went out there and really just kind of shut Zumagulov down, won a very, I would say, dominant decision victory over him. Followed that up with another decision win over a tough kid in Kevin Borjas. Borjas laid it on Van early in that fight. He tagged him a couple times. He had Van in trouble for a minute there, but Van was able to keep his composure, dust himself off and recover and get that fight back, get that win back, and win another decision there. So he's 2-0 in the UFC. He's taking on Felipe Bunes, who is the former LFA flyweight champion, a very high-level grappler, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt with elite submission skills. And he's got some good striking, too. He's got a very aggressive Muay Thai style. He's got some power in his hands and his feet. He does have the tendency of keeping his chin up, and I've noticed that in kind of watching film on him. He keeps his chin up there, which is concerning against a guy like Van, who, like I said, he loves to throw hands, and he's got some crisp boxing. So it makes sense why Van is the slight favorite here, especially when you consider the fact that Van's 21 years old. He's a pretty, hyped up prospect with a lot of upside to him. Felipe Bunes is 34 years old. So this is probably his one and only shot at a UFC run. But I think people are looking past Bunes. I really do. I think, listen, we haven't seen much of a ground game from Van yet. Not to say that he doesn't have one. But Bunes is just another animal on the ground, man. I mean, like I said, very high-level black belt. And the other thing to consider here is, like I said, he's 34 years old, so he's got a very small window to make a run in the UFC. And he knows that. And he's already an aggressive fighter to begin with. And I think aggression is the best way to approach a guy like Josh Van. We saw that in the Borjas fight. Borjas was having success when he put the pressure on Van and didn't give him an opportunity to breathe. And then once he started slowing down and let Van get his rhythm going, that's when he lost that fight. So I see Bunes coming out like a bat out of hell. I see him pressuring Van early, getting a takedown. And listen, it may only take one takedown. If Van might not get back up after that first takedown, but even if he does, I see Bunes getting another takedown, eventually getting that rear naked choke strangle. So give me the underdog. Give me Felipe Bunes by either first or second round submission. Next fight on the card, we've got Nick Moda taking on Tom Nolan. Nick Moda is a guy that's been in the UFC for a while with some mixed success and has been pretty lackluster in his wins, and in his losses, he's looked pretty bad, if I'm being totally honest. He got saved last time out against Trey Ogden, which was an absolute travesty. I mean, that decision made no sense. You had Trey Ogden, who was an underdog in that fight, slight underdog, was winning that fight on points, got a dominant position, got an arm triangle choke on Nick Moda, and it looked like Nick Moda was about to pass out. The referee thought he was out, called it off, and Moda immediately argued that he was still in there. He wasn't out yet. Somehow was able to get the ref to overturn his decision and call it a no contest, which made zero sense to me because this happened in the third round. They had a whole fight to go off of, and Ogden was winning. So you rob the guy of a win, you call it a no contest, and you give Nick Moda, you save him from another loss on his record. So I thought that was a terrible decision. He's getting this fight here against Tom Nolan, and it's kind of a setup fight for Nolan. Nolan just had an impressive performance on Dana White's Contender Series last year. He's got big power in his hands. He's got a very exciting style, a lot of hype around him. He's from Australia, so the UFC, they're trying to promote their regional talent, especially their young regional talent. They want new stars across the world. So they would love nothing more than Tom Nolan to come out in his debut, knock out an experienced guy like Nick Moda, and get the world talking about him. And I think that's going to happen. I think, listen, we don't know much about Nolan, so I'm not super, super confident. And Moda's got, like I said, he's got experience. He's well-rounded. He's got some pretty good stand-up for the most part. So this isn't going to be a total walk in the park for Nolan. And if it is, we'll know that he's for real, because as much as I say that Nick Moda is kind of lackluster, he's not a terrible fighter. So, I wouldn't put Tom Nolan in a ton of your parlays, maybe a few of them, but I do think there's a slight chance he could be the parlay buster on this card. But I'm going with Tom Nolan. I do think he's going to win by knockout, so give me Tom Nolan by first round knockout or TKO finish. Next fight on the card, we've got Weston Wilson taking on Gene Silva, another Dana White Contender Series prospect in Gene Silva, and he is the biggest favorite on this card at minus 900, which is absolutely insane. But I also can see why, because let's face it, Weston Wilson is not very good. Not a knock on the guy. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Listen, any of these guys would beat my ass. So, I hate to say that when I'm breaking down fights, but this is a guy that's 36 years old, and he just got knocked out in devastating fashion by Joanderson Brito in his UFC debut last year. And listen, there's no shame in that. I mean, Brito is an absolute killer. That guy's knocking everybody out. So there's not necessarily shame in that. But I just don't see any aspect in Weston Wilson's game that screams UFC level. And I hate to say that because I really have a ton of respect for his camp. I mean, he trains out of Simpsonville, South Carolina with Stephen Thompson and Ray Thompson, who I have a tremendous amount of love and respect for. I actually interviewed both of them years ago on my old podcast. Some of the nicest people you'll meet in this sport. And I'm a karate guy myself. I come from Shaolin Kempo Karate. I'm a black belt. Karate has a very special place in my heart. But having said that, there's a reason why there's only a select few karate guys that have been able to transition into MMA effectively. And it's because it's a style that just doesn't translate well in MMA. I mean, a lot of these guys keep their hands down. They're a little too defensive in the stand-up when they should be a little bit more offensive, right? And there are some good takeaways, right? There's some good things you can take from karate. And guys like Stephen Thompson, Lyoto Machida, George St. Pierre, Nick Dalby is a recent example of that. I really like his karate style and what he's been doing in the UFC. You know, all these guys have been able to take those good attributes, you know, the feints, the footwork, the elusiveness, but they've also learned the other stuff too, right? And I just see Weston Wilson, and his stand-up is not very good. He does have some surprisingly good grappling. I mean, most of his wins are by submission, but he's only fought, you know, lower-level or regional opponents. And I just think against this guy, Gene Silva's very similar to Joanderson Brito, a very aggressive, powerful Muay Thai-based fighter with a good ground game too. And I just think this is, you know, we talked about that last matchup, how it was a setup fight for Tom Nolan to look good. This is without a doubt a setup fight for Gene Silva to look good. So give me Gene Silva, probably by first round knockout. Next fight on the card, we've got Matthew Semelsberger taking on Preston Parsons. Semelsberger's taking this on short notice. He's replacing Basil Hafez, who fell out with an illness a couple of weeks ago. So Semelsberger's taking this on about a week and a half's worth of notice. And man, this is a tough one to break down because I like Semelsberger, but I also think he's a bit of a one-trick pony. He's really just a power guy. He's a guy that's got power in his hands, but that doesn't always translate to the knockouts. It doesn't always translate to finishes. He tends to get a lot of knockdowns in his fights. I mean, I think he's knocked down like pretty much every single opponent he's fought in the UFC. But I can't remember off the top of the head if he's ever knocked anybody out, at least in the UFC. Having said that, though, I could see him tagging Parsons a couple of times, getting those knockdowns, and winning a decision off of the damage, off of the, you know, significant strikes landed. Preston Parsons is pretty good, though. He's pretty underrated. He's got some good stand-up. He's better known for his grappling, but he's capable on the feet. So I'm going back and forth on this because on one hand, I can see Semelsberger coming out and like I said, getting those big power shots off, dropping Parsons a few times, and winning that decision. I could also see Semelsberger, you know, completely fading, slowing down. He doesn't have great cardio to begin with, and he took this fight on short notice, so that's a little bit of a concern too. And I could see Parsons taking advantage of that and, you know, eventually bringing the fight to the floor, getting some ground control, and seeing Preston Parsons win a decision. So this, to me, it really could go either way. I am leaning on Semelsberger. I think he's going to get those big shots off. He's going to, you know, win on damage and get that kind of like that close decision win where it's like, well, Parsons did more with control, but Semelsberger had more damage, and we all know MMA judging now has kind of leaned towards damage over control. So give me Matt Semelsberger by decision. Next up, we've got one of the OGs of the fight game, Andre the Pitbull Arlovsky, taking on a former baseball player in Waldo Cortez Acosta. And let's just take a second to highlight how crazy it is that at 44 years of age, Andre Arlovsky is still in the UFC. I mean, just to paint you guys a picture, I'm 32 years old. When I was 15, when I was my freshman year of high school, Andre Arlovsky was the UFC heavyweight champion. And in fact, he was one of the very first fighters that I became a fan of when I got into MMA because I just loved the guy. I mean, he was fun to watch. He was knocking these guys out, and then he was wearing that mouth guard that had the pit bull fangs on him, and I was a huge Arlovski fan back in the day, and I give the guy all the credit and respect in the world for being able to have a long career. I mean, as long as he's had, he's outlasted so many other fighters, and he's still going. He's still going at 44. But having said that, he is slowing down quite a bit. He's never really been known for having much of a chin. He's always been kind of a chinny fighter, and it's been knocked out a ton of times in his career, but has always found a way to kind of bounce back. Like, he'll lose a couple fights and then he'll win a few fights to keep himself relevant, right? And he's coming off of a pretty bad knockout loss last time out against Dontel Mays. This is tough because on paper, when you look at the skill set of both these guys on paper, Andrei Arlovski is the better fighter. He's got better boxing. He's got better grappling. In fact, I think the grappling is where he should take this. He should try to get Waldo Cortez Acosta to the ground and try to submit him, but he's not going to do that. It's just not. It's not the way Arlovski fights. He's going to keep it standing. He's going to try to work his jab, work his boxing. And I think he's going to get knocked out again. And hate to say it, hate to say that, and I don't want to see that happen. But I think Cortez Acosta, he's not that great. He's not. I don't see a particular aspect of his game that really screams world beater. But he does have power. I mean, all these heavyweights have power, and I think he's going to put Arlovski out. And if that's the case, I really hope Arlovski retires. Listen. He's had the longest career out of any MMA fighter, any active MMA fighter. It's time to hang it up if that's the case. But I wish him nothing but the best. I'm rooting for Andrei Arlovski. Win, lose, or draw, I certainly hope he hangs it up. But, we'll see what happens. All right, before I move on over to the main card, I did skip one of the prelims by accident, and that's Farid Basharat versus Taylor Lapilus. And it's actually a pretty intriguing matchup stylistically. I kind of want to go with the underdog in Lapilus. He's got really good kickboxing, really quick on his feet, good technique, but man, Basharat he's good everywhere, man. He's got good technical striking. His wrestling is phenomenal. His ground game is legit. And I just don't think Lapilus has the style to beat this guy. I think in order to beat a guy like Basharat, you have to come forward. You got to land some big shots, and you got to hope you put him away, because if you don't put this guy away, he's going to keep coming after you. And as much as I like Taylor Lapilus's kickboxing, I think he's going to have problems against Basharat. I see Basharat having some success in the stand-up for a little bit before going to his wrestling, getting the fight to the ground. Taylor Lapilus does have some pretty decent takedown defense, but he was taken down a couple times in his last fight against the Irish prospect. What's the kid's name? Colin Logren, if I'm pronouncing that right. But there's a difference in the level of wrestling between Colin Logren and Farid Basharat. It's just, there's levels to this. I see Basharat getting some takedowns. Lapilus might get back up a few times. Basharat's going to keep taking him down. I actually could see Basharat submitting him, and I'm going to be bold here and say it's going to be a second or third round submission. So give me Farid Basharat. He's going to keep his undefeated record alive by second or third round submission. All right, we are at the main card, and we're kicking things off with a fight between Phil Hawes and Bruno Ferreira. And Phil Hawes is one of those guys where he's probably the best fighter in his gym, at least on the practice room in sparring. He's one of those guys where you call them sparring champions, right? Because, they're kicking everybody's ass in the gym, and then they get into their fights, and it's not carrying over. There's a mental problem there because physically, he's got it all. He's got every physical attribute that you could want. Mentally, there's something wrong with him. There's something that is preventing him from having success in the octagon. And, I don't know if he's addressed those mental aspects. If he's not worked with a sports psychologist, and a lot of these guys don't, because like I said at the start of this video, we overlook the mental aspect, and it's probably one of the most important aspects of the fight game. So if Phil Hawes has not sought out the help of a sports psychologist or has not addressed some of those mental deficiencies, I think he's getting clipped here because he's very chinny. He's been knocked out several times in his career, and recently he's been knocked out quite a bit. Bruno Ferreira has thunder in his hands. This is a guy, I mean, his nickname is the Hulk, and he lives up to that because he has some big power. And he's not necessarily that great technically, and he's also pretty chinny. I mean, he was just knocked out in his last fight against Nursultan Huziboyev, if I'm pronouncing that right. He got chinned. And so, I could see that happening again. If he leaves himself open and if Phil Hawes shows up and comes in prepared and, exposes some of those holes, Phil Hawes can get it done because he's got power. But I'm going to go with Bruno Ferreira. I think he's going to be able to close the distance early, land that big shot, and unfortunately put Phil Hawes away. And it might be the end of Phil Hawes' run in the UFC. All right, moving on up this card, we've got bantamweights going at it between top-ranked Ricky Simón and Mario Batista. And this is an interesting matchup because you got Simón, who's ranked, I think, 13 in the official UFC bantamweight rankings. He's coming off a loss last time out. It was a 5-round main event against Song Yadong on a fight night card. Couldn't really get anything going against Yadong. Ended up getting finished late in that fight in the 5th round by a TKO finish. But he is a very good fighter. He's got great wrestling. He's usually able to use his strikes to set up takedowns, and he's had a lot of success in the UFC thus far. Taking on Mario Batista, who is looking to obviously break into those top 15 rankings, and a win over Ricky Simón will do that. I mean, he might even take Simon's position if he beats him, because I don't know. I mean, 2 losses in a row, Simón might be out of the top 15, and Batista will, crack his way into it. With that being said, this is a tricky one, man, because I've listened to a lot of people break this fight down. Everybody seems to think Simon's going to get his wrestling going. He's going to just, have his way with Batista on the ground, just rack up, control time and probably win a pretty dominant decision. And I can see that happening, but I don't know. I got a really good feeling about Batista. I just think, for one, he's better than people are giving him credit. He's got fantastic striking, but he's also got a really good ground game. And doesn't have the best takedown defense, so I do see him getting taken down a couple of times. But he's got a really good scramble game. He's able to get back to his feet most of the time, and I think he can do that against Ricky Simón. So while I do see Simón having success with the wrestling, I don't think he's going to be able to totally dominate Batista. I see Batista scrambling back up to his feet or scrambling into a more dominant position on the ground. And I actually think Batista's got a better submission game than Ricky Simón. So I could see Batista either submitting Ricky Simón or just being able to get back to his feet, get his stand-up going, because I do think he's a better striker than Simón. So, man, I got to take the underdog here. I just have a gut feeling that he gets it done. So, listen, there's also a mental aspect to it as well. Ricky Simón had several failed takedown attempts against Song Yadong. I mean, he tried to take him down multiple times, couldn't do it, got roughed up in that fight pretty badly. And, I think that's going to take a toll on him mentally. And there's, one of 2 ways he can respond to that. He can either shut out those negative voices, remind himself that he's still one of the best wrestlers in the division, go in there, implement his game plan, take Mario Batista down, and impose his will. Or he can let that last performance dwell on him, really mess with his psyche, and his takedown attempts can get worse and worse, a little sloppier as he's trying to, go for those shots. And Mario Batista can capitalize on that and get a win. And I just have a gut feeling that the latter is going to happen. So give me Mario Batista. I'm going to take him by decision, but I do think a finish is pretty possible as well. Next fight on the card, we've got another OG in the fight game, Jim Miller taking on Gabriel Benitez. And man, you talk about an absolute warrior. I mean, I can't say enough good things about Jim Miller. This is a dude that's been around forever. I mean, he fought on UFC 100, he fought on UFC 200, and he might get a fight for UFC 300. I mean, it's crazy to think about that. And yes, he's 40 years old, and he does look a little bit slower. He does look like he's on a little bit of a decline, but at the same time, he still looks pretty good. He's coming off a big knockout win in his last fight, and he's still durable, man. I mean, it's still tough to put Jim Miller away. And this fight's a pick'em. Right now, they're both at -113. Miller he opened up as a slight underdog originally, and I think a lot of that is just due to the fact that he's getting old, and it's hard to pick these old, it's hard to pick these old dogs to win these fights, right? But that's exactly what I'm going to do here, man. I don't see any aspect of Gabriel Benitez's game that's going to shine here. I mean, I really don't. I don't think he's a better grappler than Miller. I don't think he's a better striker. His only hope is that Miller looks old. And, it's possible because Father Time catches us all. But he didn't look that old in his last fight. And even in that war that he had with Alexander Hernandez before that, where he lost a pretty close decision, I mean, he looked good. He looked durable. He was pressing forward. He looked a little bit slower than, obviously he's going to look slower at 40 years old than he did in his 30s, right? In his 20s. That's a given. But I just don't see Benitez doing much here, man. Give me Jim Miller. Give me Jim Miller by first round or second round finish. All right, moving on to the co-main event. We've got top-ranked flyweights rematching here between Matheus Nicolau and Manal Kape. Nicolau won the last fight. He won a pretty close decision, but he is the underdog and a pretty sizable underdog here at plus, I think 250 is the latest odds, 250 or 220 against Manal Kape in the rematch. And it makes sense. I mean, Nicolau just got knocked out viciously by Brandon Royval his last time out. I believe that was the first time Nicolau's ever been knocked out. So that's going to be, we're going to see how he bounces back from that. Is he going to, come back stronger? Or a lot of times we see these fighters get knocked out and they're never the same. So that's going to be interesting to see how he recovers from that knockout loss. On the other hand, Manal Kape has been on a tear since that fight. I mean, he has turned into an absolute monster. I mean, he already was a very good technical striker to begin with, but I think that loss to Nicolau awoken something in him because he has looked fantastic since. He's, inching closer and closer to potential flyweight title shot. And he wins this fight against Nicolau. I think he's going to get that fight with probably Kai Kara-France, which those guys do not like each other, obviously. So I see that being a kind of a fight night main event maybe. And he beats Kai Kara-France. He's getting a title shot. So very possible. I could see that happening for Manal Kape this year. But as far as this matchup, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the odds. I think this is a lot closer than the odds are telling you. In fact, I would not be shocked to see Nicolau get another decision win. And here's why. Manal Kape, for as good of a striker as he is, he tends to be a little reckless at times. He tends to kind of leave himself open. And Nicolau's a very good counter striker. And we saw that in that first fight. That's one of the reasons why he edged out that decision. He was able to kind of, use his counters, bait Manal Kape into some traps and was able to kind of outland him and outpoint him. But at the same time, Manal Kape had some really good moments in that fight too. And if memory serves, I want to say I thought Manal Kape won that decision that first time out. It was close, but I think I scored it for Kape. And like I said, I do think Kape has improved a lot since then. I think he's evolved a lot more than Nicolau has. So I am leaning on Manal Kape. I think he's going to get it done. He might finish him. He might go in there, especially, this is Nicolau's first fight since the Royval knockout. What's his chin going to look like? What's he going to look like mentally too? Because, we talk about obviously getting knocked out. It takes a physical toll on a person, but don't forget the mental toll as well. How is he going to rebound from that? So a lot of questions left unanswered, but I'm going to lean on Manal Kape. So give me Kape by, you know what? I'm going to take him by finish. I think he gets it done. Give me first round TKO Manal Kape. I'm going to be bold. I'm going to be bold there. I think he gets it done pretty early, and he's going to get his fight with Kai Kara-France next time out. And you might see Manal Kape fighting for a flyweight title before the end of the year. All right, we made it to the main event here between Magomed Ankalaev and Johnny Walker. And like I said at the start of this video, there's some high stakes tied to this. You're looking at a potential, the winner of this fight potentially getting a title shot against Alex Pereira early in the year too. I mean, listen, Jamal Hill he's still out with an injury. He's still, getting recovered from that ACL injury. That's going to take some time. So who else is going to challenge Pereira? I mean, these two guys, Ankalaev never really got his rematch. He fought, Jan Blachowicz for the vacant title, fought him to a draw, and then never got another opportunity for the title after that, which is unfortunate because I do think he beat Jan Blachowicz. If I'm being totally honest, it was a close fight, but I think Magomed Ankalaev potentially should be the light heavyweight champion right now, if I'm being totally honest. But that's a tale for another story. But in any case, he's fighting Johnny Walker here. This is a rematch from a fight that they had back in Abu Dhabi in October. Like I said, there wasn't really much to that fight. It was over before the end of the first round. Ankalaev landed an illegal knee, and the fight was called a no contest. And, there's not much you can take from that. I mean, it looked like in the beginning, Ankalaev was struggling a little bit with the reach and kind of the range of Johnny Walker. But once he was able to get his wrestling going, you kind of saw the writing on the wall, and it looked like Ankalaev was, going to impose his will with his wrestling and probably end up winning that fight. But who knows? I mean, listen, you can't really. You can't go off of that fight, man, because there wasn't much there. It was over and done with, without much to it. So I look at this fight as a totally new matchup. I'm not really gonna think much about the last one, and I'm just gonna predict this fight as if they've never fought before. So here's the thing, man. I really like Johnny Walker. I'm a big fan of his style. I think since he started training with Conor McGregor's coach, John Kavanagh, he has went from a wild, reckless striker to a more technical striker, but the power's still there. That knockout threat is still there. He's just a little bit more composed, and he's just a better technical fighter overall since moving over to that Straight Blast gym in Ireland. But having said that, though, I mean, I think, being totally honest here, I don't think that style is going to work against Ankalaev. In fact, I think the old Johnny Walker, the Johnny Walker that was wild, the Johnny Walker that would, come forward and just throw wild, crazy strikes and knock people out, that's the Johnny Walker that needs to show up here if he wants to have any chance against Ankalaev. Because here's the thing, guys. Ankalaev is a very good striker, but he's got that wrestling in his back pocket too. And if Walker is going to try to fight Ankalaev the same way he fought Anthony Smith last time out, I don't think he's going to have much success. And using that example, I think there were some moments in that Anthony Smith fight where Walker could have knocked Anthony Smith out. I mean, you look at Smith went in there against Khalil Roundtree after that and got totally destroyed. And, Walker was kind of playing with him a little bit. He was kind of dancing around a little too much and had a great game plan. He was picking him apart. He was, winning on points. But, do you want to win by points, or do you want to really kind of seal the deal and knock your opponent out and leave no doubt in anybody's mind? And I don't think he's got, listen, I won't say it's impossible, but I don't think he's got much of a chance of winning a decision against Magomed Ankalaev. I mean, I think he's got to win by knockout. He's got to finish him. And in order to do that, he needs to get a little bit crazy here. He needs to throw Ankalaev out of his game plan, out of his rhythm. He's got to throw wild shit. He's got to revert back to his roots a little bit. I'm not saying totally neglect everything that he's, learned recently and the techniques that he's kind of added to his game, but I think he needs to be more aggressive here, and I think he's got to go for broke. If he doesn't do that, I think Ankalaev is going to pick him apart with a stand-up. He's a much more technical striker. And if Ankalaev is losing the striking exchanges, he can take this down to the ground at any time. And, he's got that Dagestani wrestling background, that mountain wrestling, and it's tough to stop that. And I don't see Johnny Walker stopping the wrestling from Ankalaev. So Ankalaev is going to be the pick here. But I might consider putting a little bit of a sprinkle on a Johnny Walker knockout prop. But I'm not super confident in that. Like I said, Ankalaev is the pick. Give me Magomed Ankalaev by unanimous decision. And I think you see Ankalaev go on and fight Alex Pereira for the title. And as much as I love Alex Pereira, and I'm a huge, huge fan of the guy, Ankalaev might beat him. I mean, you might be looking at the uncrowned light heavyweight champion of the world. He just has that style that's tough to beat, you know. And sure, I could see Pereira knocking him the fuck out too, though. I mean, just like he's done so many others. But man, Ankalaev, he might be the light heavyweight champion by the end of the year. So if you're looking for a pretty decent futures bet, I mean, I don't know what the odds are right now on that, but probably some decent plus money. I might consider sprinkling a little bit down on that myself. But anyway, guys, those are my picks for UFC Vegas 84. Should be a great night of fights. Let's see if if any of my predictions come true. I was pretty good last year. I had a pretty good winning record when it came to picking fights. So we're looking to keep that momentum going. But anyway, guys, until next time, let's unleash greatness. Boom!